First, it was the Qing who came for our grain. To support the emperor, they said. And soldiers came and took our harvest. We complied, of course. We were loyal subjects, after all.
It honestly surprised me at this point that a syndicalist movement wouldn't have had a bigger reaction right now because of all the turmoil and change and all the different warlords essentially taking over and fighting amongst each other, and essentially describing what he's breaking down now with, every new person that comes into power going to the farmers and the workers and demanding, more taxes, more grain, more food, more support, more bodies to fight in their wars. Eventually it's got to come to a breaking point, right? What is going on, everybody? John Matrix here. I hope you're having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at, whenever you're watching this. So it's been quite a while since we've done anything Kaiserreich related. I'm very excited that Kaiser Cat has put out 2 new videos. We're going to check out the first one today. I believe this is part 1 on the alternate history of the Chinese Civil War during it's the Kaiserreich documentary. So very much looking forward to getting into this. So yeah, links will be down below in the description as always to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to Kaiser Cat Cinema's channel. So please do me a favor, if you enjoy this video, be sure to go over there and give it a like. Check out the rest of the content on his channel if you enjoy anything Kaiserreich related. He's got a lot of lore and documentary videos from alternative World War I history of the story, the I guess what would be considered the overall canon story in the Kaiserreich universe. So it's very intriguing. I've very much been enjoying it and glad to see some new content out to check out. So looking forward to jumping into this one. And yeah, check out any kind of Patreon he's got, check out any kind of YouTube membership stuff he's got going on, for any kind of ways to give him some extra love and support. You can do the same for my channel if you'd like to. There's a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description. The YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I have to offer, so you can check those out if you would like to. Regardless, thank you guys very much for coming and hanging out, checking out the video. Hope you enjoy it. If you do, consider leaving a like and a sub. It helps me and the channel grow. There's also a bunch of playlists on the channel for a lot of other universes that I've done reactions to. We've been doing a lot with the Magnus Archives lately, the SCP Foundation, Warhammer 40k and Fantasy, some analog horror stuff like Backrooms and Greylock, etc. So you can check all that out on the channel if you would like to, if that has any interest for you. But all that said and all the YouTube plugs and shenanigans done, let's get into this. I'm very much looking forward to doing this. Kaiserreich Documentary, Episode 9, Alternate History, Chinese Civil War Lore, Part 1 by Kaiser Cat Cinema. Let's do this.
We would like to thank this video's sponsor, the incredible World War II shooter Easy Red 2. It turns out the developers of Easy Red 2 are actually fans of the channel, and they reached out to cross-promote their new Shanghai Nanking DLC alongside our upcoming China content. This DLC, one of several campaign DLCs for the game, marks a massive expansion of the base game into the Eastern China theater of World War II. Easy Red 2 Shanghai Nanking is perhaps the only campaign that lets you experience the full-scale warfare of the Sino-Japanese War in historical battles across the Northern Plains, as well as the brutal urban combat of Shanghai. Easy Red 2 truly is a World War II battle simulator of an epic scale. The game features dozens of historical missions in both PvE and PvP, with fully playable infantry, vehicles, and aircraft, plus a full map and mission editor. Honestly, you won't believe what $9 gets you with this game.
Really? Only $9 bucks.
More about Easy Red 2 after video. But for now, enjoy the show, cats.
There you go. If you're interested in the game, go check it out. It's on Steam. He said links are in the description of his video. So, click the link down below for my channel to go to his channel, check out his video, and, check out the Steam links. Or you can just find it directly on Steam.
Chaos continues to reign in the Chinese concessions as the situation deteriorates further. A growing mob of protesters, swept up by the late Sun Yat-sen's Kuomintang, have completely crippled all pretenses of colonial control in British Hong Kong and the Portuguese Macau.
So it's interesting, there's already getting into a lot more animation stuff going on, so I wonder if that's just because there might not be a lot of historical, black and white footage of anything happening during this time, or if it's simply because there really wasn't anything going on World War One related at that time in this era or in this area, right? They have to do that. They don't want to use like maybe World War II footage if there is any, you know what I'm saying?
Now, Imperial garrisons have retreated from most ports in Southeast Asia. In the home country, syndicalist revolutionaries have declared an end to the British Empire. Governor Claude VII has thus far been unable to... And many fear
That the revolution that has swept the home islands will have indeed destroyed the empire. God save the king.
Okay. The Kaiser Cat Collective, interesting.
Sir, I must refuse. The closure of the broadcast would mean...
I will not hear of it, Mr. Faircrest. You
Mr.
are young.
Faircrest?
You have a future ahead of you. I will not see you dragged into this madness. You will leave with the next evacuation ship.
Probably, yeah.
The Royal Marines will escort you to the port.
Governor Severn, we are out of time. I have reports that a large group of protesters is on its way down Main Street at this very moment and intends to breach Government House. Kuomintang forces are just across the border and poised to invade. Governor, we have no choice. We must evacuate now.
Sir, where would I go? The empire is crumbling. There is nowhere...
Go to Canada, son. Take your family. Go to Canada. And pray to God for better days. That is a direct order.
It was an honor, sir. May we meet again.
Miss Lansdale, I shall dictate.
Of course, Governor.
To the German Governor General of Tonkin, Oberst Lieutenant V. Rabin. I write to you with the gravest sense of urgency regarding the current situation in Hong Kong, which has rapidly become untenable. As per orders from Admiral Anderson, the Royal Navy Commander-in-Chief in China, all non-essential soldiers, ships, and accompanying staff have been instructed to withdraw at once to Australia, where I am told a significant civil disturbance has erupted, as well as to India.
Yeah.
In light of...
Yeah, in this alternate history, it's not a good time to be Britain, man. The syndicalists taking over the mainland, and yeah, all the colonies essentially falling apart, and Canada being basically the only place to fall back to. Not a good time. And then America's going through its own turmoil and civil war at this time.
this withdrawal, the ongoing difficulties facing the empire as a whole, and the massing of Chinese Kuomintang troops in Canton, I have been urged to consider an immediate evacuation of all British citizens and their families. However, I fear that upon the issuance of such an order, our vulnerability will be recognized, and the Kuomintang will descend upon this colony.
Yeah.
The line must be drawn here, at Hong Kong. It cannot go without being said that our two nations are not, and have not been for some time, on the best of terms. Yet, we are both far from the fields of Flanders, and share a great deal more in common between ourselves than with any man of the Orient.
That must be hard too, right? To be at this time, to be like a British person, whatever, you know, after World War One had happened, and to be essentially asking for help for like German aid, you know what I mean, and trying to evacuate your citizens. It's got to be a tough pill for him to swallow, you know.
I do not believe for a moment that a person such as yourself, a man of honor and good Christian bearing, would permit the surrender of this colony to the degenerate ways of syndicalists and thugs. As has been said before, blood is thicker than water. Herr Governor, as demanded by the responsibilities of my station, I must request from you a direct German intervention to ensure the continued security of Hong Kong and Southeast Asia. The British Empire can no longer uphold the security of her colonies. Our fates now lie in the hands of the Kaiserreich.
Dun dun dun! Great intro. Does feel good to be back.
For centuries, while Europe languished in the sectarian chaos of the Dark Ages, China flourished. The Middle Kingdom was a land of innovation and culture, ruled by a system of central authority that would endure for millennia. Even while Athenian democracy was taking root in the West, China had already developed a sophisticated system of imperial governance, unmatched in scale and ambition. But the tides of history are rarely so kind. The first shock to China's imperial order came with the devastating Opium Wars against Britain in the 19th century. This conflict exposed the fragility of China's isolationist policies and traditions of empire. The Qing Empire, that had once stood as a beacon of order and stability, found itself humbled, forced to confront a harsh and unfamiliar world dominated by foreign powers. For China, the Opium Wars began a cycle of national decline that would haunt the country throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. This dark period would later become known as the Century of Humiliation. The ruling Qing dynasty proved ineffective at combating the continued decline of the state, and foreign empires carved China up into spheres of influence. Not only military and political defeats scarred China, but natural disasters as well. Vast floods and droughts caused widespread devastation. This accelerated a downward spiral for Chinese institutions.
Yeah, that sound like we got a plethora of problems. Foreign countries coming in, instilling essentially, an opiate addiction crisis. And then, military defeats, natural disasters, couldn't really get any worse.
Which would prove hard to escape. By the end of the 19th century, it was clear to many that the Qing dynasty had lost its right to rule China, the so-called Mandate of Heaven. Floods, famine, and the deadliest civil war in human history had inched the Qing ever closer to collapse, as radical and nationalist tensions rapidly approached the boiling point. As if to underline the weakness of the monarchy, every new crisis became yet another example of Beijing's impotence, another nail in the coffin of Qing rule. After a disastrous war with Japan in 1894 and a devastating series of floods and droughts, the population rose up. In 1899, hundreds of thousands of northern Chinese peasants took to the streets to demand an end to their troubles. These peasants directed their ire towards foreigners and Christians in China, whom they believed to be responsible for the state of the Middle Kingdom. It was these Christian missionaries that would first coin the term Boxer Rebellion, referring to the athletic and spiritual fraternities that started the revolt. Under the slogan, "Revive the Qing, destroy the foreigners," these boxers marched on the capital and laid siege to the diplomatic quarter in Beijing, a watershed moment that sparked outrage in the West. To secure their citizens and national interests, 8 global powers formed a coalition against the Boxers. This so-called 8-nation alliance demanded that the Qing government restore order and beat back the rebels. The Qing rulers instead threw their support behind the Boxers.
Wow.
The decision would prove costly. The coalition responded with a punitive expedition and invaded China by force. Qing China, in the throes of revolution and severely behind Western technology and firepower, was in no place to resist such an invasion.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, like, after losing several wars, having several natural disasters, and yeah, it doesn't really sound like they're in a great position to try to defend themselves from invading countries.
After defeating Chinese forces at Tianjin and Beijing, the alliance forced the Qing into an unfavorable peace. This would be the harshest of many so-called unequal treaties, burdening the weakened Chinese state with costly indemnities and territorial concessions. Qing governors, attempting to navigate an increasingly stretched budget, began levying additional taxes on an already struggling populace and nationalizing provincially funded
and to raise
railways.
tensions further.
In doing so, returning their financing to foreign banks. Not long after, mass demonstrations erupted. The locals saw the plan as a betrayal. Once more, the Qing court seemed to bow to foreign interests. Thus continued a cycle of foreign intrusion and national decay that would shatter the population's remaining faith in the Manchu ruling class. In the end, this popular sentiment would turn against the institution of the empire itself and become a republican revolution to depose the Qing entirely. The 1911 Xinhai Revolution may have started as a railway protection movement, but when rebellious troops in Wuchang declared against the government, the call went up across China to resist and overthrow the Qing dynasty. The Qing had only one military force capable and modern enough to decisively quell the popular revolt, the Beiyang Army, built by the cunning Yuan Shikai. Formerly forced into exile and once seen as a threat, Yuan was called back into service as the dynasty's last hope. He agreed to lead the Beiyang army against the revolution on the condition that he was appointed prime minister. With much of his former competition dead or displaced, this sudden return restored Yuan's status as the most important power broker in the Qing court.
Convenient.
The Qing emperor, Aisin Jioro Puyi, was still only an infant, and the court needed a strong man to keep the monarchy afloat. As the Xinhai Revolution began to spread, power in Beijing converged around the Beiyang army. Yuan put the army's formidable power on full display. In head-to-head fighting, Beiyang forces dominated the revolutionaries. Despite these victories, the revolution had begun spreading at a rapid pace. Sensing an opportunity, Yuan made a bold move. The Beiyang leader opted to negotiate, presenting himself as a peacemaker and national power broker. Soon, the opportunistic general had struck a deal with the revolutionaries. Turning against his former benefactors, Yuan returned to Beijing to force the abdication of the young emperor Puyi and declare a new republic.
So he played both sides against each other so that he can come out the victor and like head of this new republic.
At the same time, under the terms negotiated with the revolutionaries, he would become provisional president. With the Qing dynasty overthrown and the young republic struggling to assert itself.
I mean, it's smart on his part, right? Because he's essentially, if he kept the status quo, he'd essentially be fighting for someone else to essentially take power, you know, once the kid becomes of age. So doing this, he gets to form a new government around his own rule, essentially.
Yuan was able to even further leverage his political experience and military might. After all, beyond the absence of a monarchy and the promise of elections, the new republic wasn't so different from the old empire. Many of its leaders and bureaucrats, from the provinces to the capital, continued their roles under new titles and offices. Through bribery, blackmail, assassinations, and intimidation, Yuan Shikai twisted the fledgling Chinese democracy into his own personal dictatorship. Less than a year later, despite electoral defeats, Yuan dissolved the National Assembly and dispensed with democratic pretenses altogether. Yuan's rapid seizure of power would not go entirely uncontested. Nationalists across the country rose up to oppose
Honestly, I don't
Yuan's
know.
hollow Chinese Republic. Chief among them was Sun Yat-sen, founder of the nationalist Kuomintang, or KMT, who had returned to China following the revolution.
I'm not sure. I'm not very familiar with, Chinese history during this time period at all. So I couldn't tell you what's diverged into alternate timeline yet or not. I would assume we're already in alternate timeline.
Rallying southern governors and their provincial forces, Sun tried to launch a general uprising, but the attempt would prove unsuccessful. Unable to seriously oppose the modernized Beiyang army, Sun's provincial troops and political support melted away. By 1914, 2 years after the revolution, Sun and his party had been forced back into exile. This defeat shattered Sun Yat-sen's belief that a democratic transition would be possible through popular action alone. China, Sun later surmised, could only be conquered by military might, and then given back to the people. A philosophy he would call
It's usually how it
the
kind of has to
people's
go.
tutelage. For now, however, Yuan Shikai's sway over the Republic would endure. As conflict in China wound down, the first news of the Weltkrieg reached Beijing. While Yuan Shikai was hollowing out the young Chinese Republic, long-building tensions in Europe exploded into the Weltkrieg in July 1914.
I think so.
The war would come to China too, albeit indirectly. Only a month into the war, Japan occupied German holdings in China. Most importantly among these was Qingdao, the so-called jewel in Germany's imperial crown. While these territories remained Chinese on paper, Japan was quick to establish military rule. After the occupation of Qingdao, the full extent of Japan's imperial machinations became clear. With Europe locked in a rapidly escalating global conflict, Tokyo used the opportunity to present an ultimatum to Yuan Shikai. In its 21 demands, Japan insisted that China surrender control of Chinese railways, make major economic concessions, and even relinquish control over its own foreign affairs. Despite internal resistance
That's quite the
and
ask.
considerable international pressure, Japan would be forced to
Asking a country to give up the right to its own foreign affairs and hand them over to the Japanese interests. That's a big ask, man. Yeah. During World War I, for sure. China went through a lot.
drop only the most outrageous demands.
And World War II.
As European imperialism tottered in Asia, it became clear that, for China at least, one foreign power was being traded for another. While this was happening, Yuan Shikai's authoritarian streak quickly approached its zenith. Against all expectation, and to considerable outrage, Yuan Shikai declared a new Chinese empire, crowning himself emperor in December 1915.
Convenient.
Yuan's insatiable
Didn't see that coming.
ambition would be his undoing, however. Until 1915, much of Yuan's influence had come from his careful positioning. However, now that he had crowned himself emperor, those with Republican sympathies were outraged, while erstwhile allied governors, bureaucrats, and generals feared his massive centralization of power would diminish their own.
Again, like the overall big theme, it seems, in this alternate Kaiserreich history is any kind of imperial anything does not seem to go over very well. Every country seems to be having some kind of either democratic or republic or socialist revolution, and anything imperial based does not end up happening.
It soon became clear that Yuan Shikai had overplayed his hand. Within weeks, much of southern China had risen under the banner of the pro-Republican National Protection Army.
Yeah.
While the south entered open revolt, the north expressed its displeasure more quietly. Many of Yuan's subordinates openly questioned his rule, creating the first divides within the Beiyang army itself. Two of his closest allies, Feng Guojiang and Duan Qirui, broke with him after his proclamation as emperor. Although Yuan's reign would end with his premature abdication after a mere 83 days, the move had destroyed any semblance of Beiyang unity. Even after his death only months later, Yuan's long shadow would hang over China for decades to come. With Yuan's demise, what had begun as a modernized force of some 60,000 men began to transform into something altogether different and far less united. In order to fight the National Protection War, the Beiyang army had ballooned in size, and by 1919 had over 500,000 men under arms. Many of these men served under hastily promoted commanders or were recruited wholesale from bandit gangs. Existing Beiyang generals, elite graduates of the Baoding and Tianjin military academies, took on increasingly political roles, becoming ministers, even military governors, and forming broad networks of power. As a result, the word Beiyang came to describe northern Beijing-based governments in general, and warlord came to describe virtually any prominent military figure, from national leaders to local commanders to bandit chiefs. By the end of the decade, the term Beiyang Army ceased to have any real meaning at all. To many historians, this transitional period would mark the end of China as a centralized state and the beginning of the warlord era.
Interesting.
Still,
so China essentially seems to have gone from a unified country after being a bunch of different nation city-states. I don't know what the proper terminology would be to call them. In ancient Chinese history, or I don't know if it would even be considered ancient Chinese history, but from, a bunch of individual nations to a unified country, and now seems to have been broken up into a bunch of individual nations again.
Was the core of the original Beiyang army that would come to dominate the following warlord era. Figures like Duan Qirui and Cao Kun used their ties within the army to expand their power far beyond it. As China continued to transform politically and economically, these ambitious leaders exploited the turbulent times to their personal advantage. Some tied themselves into the nation's rapidly modernizing economic institutions, banking, industry, and commerce. Others incorporated old Qing arsenals and cut deals with international arms traders. As the foreign concessions in Shanghai and Tianjin flourished, warlords tapped into their wealth and connections too. Weaker, more local leaders established vertical ties, pledging their loyalty to regional or national power brokers. As a result, powerful warlords became the hearts of patronage networks crossing military, political, and provincial boundaries. These loose alliances would later be referred to as the first warlord cliques.
That's crazy. And look how many different factions there are. Mongolia has its own nation again. That's crazy.
Although most warlords drew their main strength from military patronage, this wasn't always true. In 1917, Duan Qirui, formerly Yuan's Minister for War, established his own political party, the so-called Anfu Club. After a botched Manchu restorationist coup, Duan ordered new elections and discarded the provisional constitution, allowing his Anhui clique to sweep elections and become a bureaucratic powerhouse. Though he controlled few forces personally, he held onto virtually all legal levers of power, including the National Assembly, numerous provincial governments, and the cabinet, making him the most powerful figure in the early warlord era, sometimes called the Anhui era. Duan's rule would not go unchallenged. Hundreds of dismissed assemblymen and a significant part of the navy fled south, allowing Sun Yat-sen to declare a rival constitutional protection government in Gwangju and deny Duan's Anfu parliament uncontested legitimacy. This would crystallize the North-South division in China, but both governments would fall victim to endemic infighting and increasingly autonomous warlords. As a consequence, neither side would be able to unite the country for a decade. In Beijing, tensions grew within the Beiyang government itself. Where the Anhui clique had formed from the late Qing bureaucracy, the Jili emerged from its military academies. Feng Guojiang had been central to the instruction of the Beiyang Army's officer corps, and his former students became the core of the new Jili clique. However, Feng retired in 1918 and died not long after, leaving the faction to Cao Kun. Though a veteran commander, Cao did not command the same level of respect Feng once had. Unlike Feng, he had supported Yuan Shikai's enthronement, and he was known to be unscrupulous.
Bro, that job's got to suck. These guys are just sitting in the car, driving, and you got to walk next to him with this like umbrella. Not a job I'd want to have.
Even for a warlord. Initially, the Jili and Anhui cliques were broadly cooperative, with the former providing much of the Beiyang government's military backbone. However, Duan and Cao disagreed on national policy. To make matters worse, they quickly developed a personal rivalry born from political competition. As Duan attempted to draw the nation back together, Cao courted the peripheral warlords, those in the far south, northeast and west, whose power flourished in the absence of central government control. In response, Duan made deals with the Japanese to provide arms and funding for his troops, while Cao reached out to the Germans. With the Weltkrieg underway, the Germans had little to offer. But by 1918, the notion of Chinese reunification had become tied up in questions of nationalism, imperialism, and a simmering conflict that would later grow into the German-Japanese struggle in Asia.
Oh, really?
As many balked at Duan's Japanese ties, his reunification negotiations with the southern warlords stalled. To most, reunification was only possible if the government in Beijing cut ties with Japan and stopped expanding the Beiyang army. With much of Duan's power coming from...
I mean, that makes sense, right? Because if you want to have your own centralized government again, you don't want to have foreign countries having their hands in it and making, profit off it, exploiting you, etc. So that only makes sense that they would want them to cut ties with Japan, and obviously Japan's not going to be happy about that.
Exactly these sources, the demands were unacceptable. This stalemate would be broken only after the Weltkrieg's end, as leaked documents exposed the existence of secret, so-called Nishihara loans. These Japanese loans were made mainly to fund Duan's portion of the Beiyang army and reform the waning central government. With the nation divided and the Boxer indemnity still outstanding, Duan had struggled to balance the budget. However, the loan's terms proved deeply exploitative and highly unpopular. The Anhui clique would never recover from the Nishihara scandal. Less than a year later, the Jili, backed by the nascent Fengqiang clique in Manchuria, shattered the Anhui as a significant force in Chinese politics. As the dust settled domestically, the Jili emerged as the most powerful force in the north. However, the southern warlords remained untouched, and it was clear Chinese unity would not be achieved simply by ousting Duan from Beijing.
There's a lot of different eras happening back to back to back here in China. There's a lot of turmoil and change happening during this era. More and more factions seem to be jumping up too.
To an end. Against all odds, the German Empire now stood triumphant over a broken France and Britain. The 1919 Versailles Treaty forced France to cede her Indo-Chinese holdings to Germany, and British power east of India became severely compromised. This shift in the imperial balance of power would not bring peace to Asia, however. During the Versailles peace negotiations, Japan refused to return Qingdao and her new Pacific possessions to the battered Kaiserreich, despite British urging. Seeing Britain's desperation for peace as a betrayal, Japan refused to sign the Versailles Treaty altogether. In the eyes of the Japanese, it was not they who had lost the war, and Germany could not afford another protracted conflict in the East. This proved to be true. Even in victory, the Kaiserreich had been driven to the brink of national starvation, and it would take years for Berlin to consolidate her newly won possessions. Within months, Japan and Germany settled into an uneasy détente, but this mounting rivalry would not be soon forgotten by either side. Only in November 1921, after mediation by multiple parties, Japan reluctantly agreed to return Germany's colonies and end the Great War in Asia. In exchange, Tokyo received international recognition of its exclusive interests in Manchuria. This Qingdao Accord proved deeply unpopular in Japan. The Japanese public had long felt it had already secured a free hand in Manchuria after its 1905 victory over Russia.
Seems like they essentially gave up something for something they already had. It's essentially giving up something for nothing.
When the terms of the agreement...
I guess you could see it as them giving up a territory in order for their claim to Manchuria to be legitimized by everyone else in the global scale. I guess you could see that, but I guess, yeah, domestically in Japan wouldn't seem like a good deal, probably.
Were announced, riots broke out in Japanese urban centers, and the German-Japanese rivalry only intensified. Meanwhile, in Beijing, a new regime began to take shape. The Jili clique's victory over the Anhui had not been achieved alone. Soon, Cao Kun found himself in the uncomfortable position of sharing power with two other ambitious figures, Jiang Zuolin, leader of the northeastern Fengqiang clique, and Wu Peifu, his own right hand. Wu was widely regarded as one of the most formidable generals of his time. His military prowess had played a central role in the Jili triumph over Duan's Anhui clique. Leading from the front, Wu orchestrated a bold flanking maneuver during the decisive battle near Beijing, and his daring attack routed the Anhui forces in just 4 days. This triumph would propel Wu's name into living legend, and it wasn't long before he became known as the Jade Marshal, a nickname unique among Wu's warlord rivals. Unlike his peers, who began their careers as soldiers or bandits, Wu Peifu had been educated as a Confucian scholar, passing the grueling imperial civil service examination to become a Sai Yu Tai, or outstanding talent. Even more unusually, Wu eschewed direct ties with foreign powers. This nationalism and unique background, paired with military success, gave the Jade Marshal a special form of legitimacy among Chinese intellectuals, and in turn, politics at large. Since time immemorial, Jade had represented purity, quality, and virtue, a mark of kings and emperors. To his supporters, Wu represented all these qualities and more. He was a gentleman, a philosopher general, and an echo of ages past. A Zhuge Liang or Liu Bei for a new era. To his enemies, Wu was something else altogether. His popular image and cultured background could not be ignored, but neither could his ruthless nature, nor his ties to the corrupt Cao Kun. Wu's warlord troops were just as violent and uncontrolled as most of his adversaries, and his deeply conservative views put him at odds with revolutionaries of almost all flavors. While Wu might seem to balk at his fellow warlords' abuses, he would never take substantive action to rein them in. He might seem outwardly upright and honorable, gracious and worldly, but in the end, Wu simply told everyone what they wanted to hear. Thus, to Wu's enemies, he was no honorable leader, but
just another politician, another snake in the grass, doing whatever he can to take advantage of the situation and come out on top.
Instead, a scheming villain in the mold of Cao Cao, or a kind of Chinese Ludendorff.
There is an old saying, good iron is not made into nails. A good man does not become a soldier. Wu Peifu was a soldier, but they said his new government would be a good government of good men. It was to be open and transparent, public-minded, and protective of personal liberties. There was to be a new constitution, inspired by the Western model and negotiations to reunite the country.
See, would that even be something that the populace would be interested in, seeing a constitution modeled after foreign countries, when there was already kind of a cry to reestablish imperialism by the populace from what they were saying earlier,
Its ministers were to be educated elite, great engineers, scientists, and scholars, the best of them educated in Berlin or Oxford, Yale or Harvard.
The foreign education,
the excitement in the summer of 1922, as rumors spread across the broadsheets. For the first time in a decade, the future in China looked bright. Yet, there were two things Wu Peifu did not account for: the intractability of intellectuals and the power of jealousy. Wu and his good men could not agree beyond basic principles. Was there to be centralism or federalism? Self-governance or top-down rule? Everyone agreed there had to be a plan, but no plan could be agreed. Then, when elections were held in October of 1923, Cao Kun openly bribed the assembly, seeking to counter Wu's influence by paying them their long overdue wages. Cao won the presidency in a landslide. Wu was publicly outraged, but Cao was his
I
superior.
mean, who wouldn't be?
And real opposition would mean a disastrous civil war within the Zhili clique.
Right.
In the end, the Jade Marshal did nothing. It is said that a good man is defined by his ability to stand firmly against evil forces. Perhaps we were fools to look for such men among soldiers. Good iron is not made into nails. A good man does not become a soldier.
Zhang Zuolin, the third member of the Uneasy Coalition in Beijing, could not have been more different. Zhang Zuolin's background was that of a pauper. Born in northeastern China, also known as Manchuria, Zhang
I would
spent
assume he's probably going to be more of a man of the people since he grew up poor.
his early years hunting and fishing, receiving little in the way of formal schooling. Later in life, when asked where he had studied, Zhang would answer, "The University of the Green Forest," a euphemism not unlike the School of Hard Knocks.
Yeah.
By his teens, Zhang Zuolin had joined organized crime, and by 20 had become a soldier, fighting in the First Sino-Japanese War. When the war ended, Zhang turned to banditry, forming a small personal army and acquiring something of a Robin Hood-style reputation. When the Xinhai Revolution came and went, Zhang saw an opportunity to begin his political ascent. He climbed the political chaos like a ladder, seizing upon the Northeast's frontier isolation to pick and choose his battles. Despite his humble origins, Zhang Zuolin proved himself to be a savvy political operator. As the de facto ruler of Fengtian province, Zhang pledged fealty to Yuan Shikai's short-lived empire. This move earned him recognition from the self-proclaimed emperor. Yet, when Yuan's empire collapsed, Zhang was conspicuously absent from Beijing. By 1919, the bandit leader had extended his rule to cover over all three northeastern provinces, cementing his place as a dominant force in China's fractured landscape. Internally, Zhang's Fengtian regime offered stability. He forged deep connections among the region's leaders, its commerce guilds, business owners and gentry, leading by guided consensus instead of overbearing authority. Once endemic bandits were cowed or incorporated. Ambitious rivals were placated with generous bribes. Zhang did not want for money, after all. Manchuria's abundant coal, steel, and open frontiers proved bountiful.
I bet.
Zhang carefully negotiated partnerships with the Japanese, too, extracting maximum gain while never quite pushing himself into servitude. With Manchuria's favorable geography and the Fengtian army at his disposal, Zhang managed to turn the region into an indomitable fortress, accessible only through a few mountain passes and a single railway connection. This fortress also became a platform.
Smart. He sounds like he's set himself up in a good position to, have a strong political say in what's going on, having a very defensible area, having strong ties with Japan while not putting himself in a detrimental position with them. Sounds pretty smart.
From which to project power southward into northern China, including Beijing. However, as strong as Zhang Zuolin's position might have appeared on a map, it remained compromised. While Wu Peifu and Cao Kun surrounded themselves with old military and bureaucratic allies, Zhang kept different company. His closest associates were his old bandit friends, born and bred like he was on the northeastern frontier.
People he could trust.
These scoundrels made for loyal partners, but they held little sway in political circles.
Right.
And most had an insatiable appetite for luxury. Zhang Zuolin himself became notorious for purchasing the most expensive custom body car made in America, an armored 1921 Packard Twin 6, featuring a full-size machine gun mounted in the passenger seat. Despite his vast wealth and efforts to shore up his reputation, the former bandit would never be recognized as one of China's social elite. The aftermath of the Zhili-Anhui War would be the first time, but far from the only one, where Zhang's struggle for national legitimacy would turn into armed conflict. Within weeks, the Zhili and Fengtian cliques began to compete over political appointments, budgets, and spheres of influence. By early 1922,
it sounds like they're
Zhang
building towards
Zuolin
another
found himself
conflict.
politically outmaneuvered. With few other options, he deployed his troops in early April. Unlike the previous clashes, which lasted less than 10 days, this Jili-Fengtian War would involve multiple offensives and counteroffensives, consuming northern China for over 2 months. By midsummer, Wu's Jili forces had pushed the Fengtian back into their northeastern holdings and won the war. Now Wu Peifu had decisively bested his adversaries through flanking maneuvers and deceptive tactics twice. This second victory, though less sweeping than the last, affirmed Jili control over northern China and further elevated the Jade Marshal's growing prestige.
There's so much happening in China during this time period, it's crazy.
While the power struggle between the Anhui, Jili, and Fengtian cliques would dominate much of Chinese politics during the 1920s, their actual control did not extend far beyond northern, eastern, and central China. Throughout the warlord era, the breakdown of governmental authority, limited network of railways, and sheer size of the country greatly isolated its various regions. Reaching China's far west, where there were no railways at all, could take over a month, and it was faster to travel from Beijing to Guangzhou by steamer than overland. Guangzhou in particular became the refuge of Sun Yat-sen's Kuomintang, or Nationalist Party of China. By the 1920s, Sun Yat-sen's vision for China had been expressed in the 3 principles of the people. These principles were nationalism, democracy, and the people's livelihood. Despite their ideological basis, the Kuomintang sometimes resembled an alliance of political factions rather than a single revolutionary party. In an effort to unify these divided groups, Sun made his southern government explicitly military and increasingly authoritarian in character. Eventually,
Not very syndicalist.
The Chinese nationalists began to have much more in common with the other warlords than most would have liked to admit. Despite several setbacks, the Kuomintang slowly gathered new strength and courted new allies. Among them, Chen Zhongming, a minor warlord from Guangdong with whom Sun had long collaborated. Outwardly, Chen subscribed to many of the Kuomintang's ideas. Like Sun, he endorsed democratic ideals. Unlike him, however, Chen was adamant that reunification should come about peacefully, gradually, and in a federal manner. In his view, a violent military approach would only bring more devastation, instability, and civil war to China. By August 1921, Sun and Chen had successfully driven the remaining regional warlords out of Guangzhou and established a new nationalist government to rival the Jili regime in Beijing. Despite this military success, the relationship between Sun and Chen quickly began to deteriorate. Disregarding his lofty democratic ideals, Sun had begun operating the party as an unquestioned dictator. Chen, on the other hand, openly courted anarchists, syndicalists, and other federalists in eastern Guangdong.
Basically anyone who would help him, huh?
Reached a boiling point a year later. In 1922, the Jili made overtones to establish a government of national unity, one which would strongly favor Jili influence, of course. When the news reached southern China, the nationalists debated how to handle the issue. Rather than accept an unfavorable unification, Sun proposed launching an offensive against Beijing instead, a so-called Northern Expedition. Chen, ever the negotiator, refused to commit his forces to this offensive, especially after the failure of several such ventures the years before. Eventually, seeing the disagreement as irreconcilable, Chen Zhongming led an attempted coup against Sun and the KMT. When it failed, Chen and his men were expelled at first from the city and later southern China as a whole. With this defeat in the south and Wu Peifu refusing to entertain federalism in Beijing, Chen's dreams of a federal China seemed lost forever. Now, further than ever from achieving his revolutionary goals, Sun decided to court new allies and reorganize the party. He formed alliances with minor leftist organizations, such as the syndicalists and anarchists, many of whom were previously skeptical of, or even outright opposed to the KMT. More importantly, Sun deepened cooperation with the newly founded Commune of France. French funding would allow Sun to lessen his government's reliance on unscrupulous sources of revenue, such as opium and gambling. Meanwhile, the same funding would be used to found the Whampoa Military Academy. Just as Baoding graduates formed the backbone of the Northern Warlord Army's leadership, Whampoa would fulfill the same role for the KMT's National Revolutionary Army. Thus, the geopolitical dimensions of the warlord era broadened. As Germany backed the Jili clique and Japan backed Fan Qiang, the Kuomintang had become a partner for the syndicalist communists.
Interesting, yes. Japan has the foothold in the north, Germany's got their foothold in central China, and the syndicalists had their foothold in southern China. Interesting.
Of France. Although in Europe France seemed locked in a post-revolutionary stupor, it wouldn't be long before its foreign activities rang alarm bells in Berlin. The old imperial balance had been severely weakened by the chaos of the Weltkrieg, and the siren song of syndicalism grew ever louder.
Yep.
Indeed.
I arrived in China in the early 20s, perhaps. The party had only just begun leveraging our foreign influence for the revolution. France was still weakened from the Great War, and Germany loomed large across the border. What we found, both in London and in Shanghai, was a worker class subjugated to the most brutal oppression, ruled over by a petty oligarchy that had completely lost touch with the plight of the common man. I will concede, the oppression was more overt in China than it was in the British Isles. In the former lands of the Qing, the feudal class now wielded absolute power in the form of warlordism. Brutal regional conflicts defined the politics of the region. A never-ending cycle of civil war and bloodshed. The victim, as always, was the common man.
Yep.
The peasant and the worker bore the brunt of this violence. But the Kuomintang, yes. Among all the factions, theirs was the closest to a European political movement. It was not a workers' revolution in a way we Europeans would understand it. No. China is infinitely more complex, more ancient, more storied. But what made Sun special was a deeply rooted care for the people. We were not ideological allies in the traditional sense, but us both, syndicalists and nationalists, were victims of the imperial establishment and the insatiable corruption of the owner class. For China and for Sun Yat-sen, class struggle was the struggle against the foreign empires. First among them, of course, were the perfidious Japanese and Germans. It shames me deeply that France, too, once engaged in these underhanded colonial tactics. But there was a new age coming. This time, we could be a force for good in China.
Like I said, during this time period in the Kaiserreich universe, anything imperialism-wise, ain't doing too good.
I spent many nights talking with Sun Yat-sen and other leaders of the nationalist movement. Those summer days in Guangzhou. Even as dark as China's days looked back then, it was clear to me that a new Chinese nation was on the rise.
Interesting. Clash of Titans.
Meanwhile, warlord politics continued apace in Beijing. By August 1924, rumors spread that the Jade Marshal was on the cusp of invading Manchuria in a bid to reunite China. In response, Feng Qiang, the KMT, and remnants of the Anhui clique entered into a tripartite coalition against the Jili. Later, when a Jili governor attempted to intimidate one of the few remaining Anhui warlords into ceding Shanghai, the pact was triggered. Both the Japanese-backed, vengeful Feng Tian and the French-backed Kuomintang pledged to defend the Anhui warlord from Jili aggression. On September 13, 1924, Feng Qiang leader Jiang Zuolin denounced the Jili government and formally declared war, beginning the Second Jili-Feng Qiang War. 250,000 troops, supported by light tanks and up to 300 aircraft, tried to break out of Manchuria once more. Despite the expansion and modernization of the Feng Qiang army, Jili defenses proved formidable. A grinding trench war slowly spread along the Great Wall and through the mountain passes. With Wu Peifu's armies tied up in a ferocious defense effort in the north, Jili domains around Shanghai found themselves increasingly autonomous. Left to their own devices, these domains rallied around the ambitious Sun Chuanfang, a protege of the Jade Marshal himself. Known as the Smiling Tiger, Sun profiled himself as a good-natured and honest warlord, unlike so many two-faced
good-natured and honest
servile Chinese
warlord.
politicians.
A little bit of an oxymoron.
Despite these outward pretensions, Sun was also known for his ruthlessness and unpredictable behavior. As the Smiling Tiger gained more and more power in the provinces around Nanjing, the Jili clique began experiencing what would eventually become an internal north-south divide. Meanwhile, despite the supposed alliance between the KMT and Fengtian, Kuomintang support in the war never materialized. With Fengtian forces unable to advance in the north, it appeared the Jili might win the war through sheer exhaustion. But, before events could turn in the Jade Marshal's favor, he found himself caught in the crosshairs of an elaborate and mysterious plot. The plot would originate from one of his direct subordinates, the high-ranking general Feng Yuxiang. Feng was better known as the Christian warlord for his religious zeal and focus on discipline. Although previously declaring himself a sworn blood brother to Wu Peifu, Feng had come to quietly resent his superior. Wu's restrictive leadership, a demotion the year before, and Feng's Kuomintang sympathies made him the perfect candidate to cripple the Jili from within. Allegedly following a massive Japanese bribe, Feng made his play for power. On October the 23rd, 1924, thousands of troops under the Christian warlord reversed course and entered the Forbidden City in Beijing. The turncoats placed Jili President Cao Kun under house arrest and expelled the long-deposed Qing Emperor Pu Yi, still holed up in the old palace. Feng Yuxiang then declared himself leader of the Guominjun, or National People's Army. By the time Wu Peifu could be warned of the putsch, it was already too late. With the government seized and an entire army in his rear, Wu's war effort suddenly found itself on the verge of collapse. Fengtian generals used the chaos in the capital to launch a devastating offensive east of Beijing. Here, the Fengtian army would deploy some of its most ruthless commanders. Entering the fray, Zhang Zongchang, the dog-meat general, inflicted a decisive defeat on the Jade Marshal near Tianjin. Now on the run, Wu Peifu prepared to retreat all the way back to Henan and reorganize. Unfortunately for Wu, his path of retreat would pass near the territory of warlord Yan Xishan of the Shanxi clique. The opportunistic Yan, who had remained neutral throughout most of the warlord era, used the opportunity to seize the railway route south. In a decisive battle, Yan cut off Wu's path of retreat. With just 2,000 loyalists remaining, Wu fled by sea to Wuhan. The Jade Marshal, once expected to unify China, had fallen. Although the Jili-Fengtian War had ended in the north, fighting continued for some time in the east.
It's crazy just how many factions are going on during this time, how much turmoil has happened, and how much political change is going on. It's very interesting. Like, China in this era almost seems like there's more going on with it than everything that's happened, you know, in all the European factions. There's just so much happening.
Zhang Zhongchang moved south towards Shanghai, engaging Jili-aligned Sun Chuanfang. Both sides fought one another to a bloody stalemate, and a truce was signed by late April 1925. Sun consolidated his control over southeastern China, while Shanghai would be split between himself and Zhang Zhongchang. For his merits in the war, the dog-meat general would be rewarded with the military governorship of Shandong. Even among China's many colorful warlords, Zhang Zongchang was a special case. Notoriously, Zhang's stewardship of Shandong quickly transformed an already struggling province into a true hive of scum and villainy. Zhang Zongchang, in many ways, represented the worst of China's warlords and the full depths to which the country had fallen by the mid-1920s. The general, awarded political positions mainly for his military prowess, did not even bother with the pretense of being a politician. The dog-meat general richly rewarded his subordinates with government coin, while enforcing his often arbitrary laws at gunpoint. Zhang himself would become a figure
Interesting
of
saying.
almost folkloric irreverence. The archetypal warlord, eschewing the affairs of state for drinking, gambling, and carousing in Shanghai, all while his province spiraled into unimaginable depths of chaos and corruption.
Oh, yes, I see that look in your face. You think you can judge me, outsider? Call me a bandit, an outlaw, scoundrel? What do you know of my life? Once, I was a poor and honest man. I worked on my father's farm near Beijing. Our life was simple, hard but honest. Each season, we would be outside in the field for 14 hours every day, doing backbreaking work in the blazing summer heat and winter snows. We scraped by, but barely. First, it was the Qing who came for our grain. To support the emperor, they said. And soldiers came and took our harvest. We complied, of course. Yep. We were loyal subjects, after all.
It honestly surprised me at this point that a syndicalist movement wouldn't have had a bigger reaction right now because of all the turmoil and change and all the different warlords essentially taking over and fighting amongst each other, and essentially describing what he's breaking down now with, every new person that comes into power going to the farmers and the workers and demanding, more taxes, more grain, more food, more support, more bodies to fight in their wars. Eventually it's got to come to a breaking point, right?
Then the floods came, and then droughts. Our fields withered, my father became sick, food, once plentiful, had become scarce. In Beijing, the Qing emperor had abdicated, they told me, and we were now all servants of a Chinese republic, free and independent. Then the Anhui came and demanded our grain once more, and soldiers came and took our harvest. We complied, of course. We were loyal subjects, after all. My father's health worsened. We rice farmers now did not have enough to eat. In Beijing, they told me the despicable Anhui were defeated. The false republic had fallen, but the Zhili will show us the way forward. Then the Zhili came and demanded our grain once more, and soldiers came and took our harvest. We complied, of course. We were good citizens, after all. Father died that winter. In Beijing, they told me the corrupt Zhili clique has been thwarted. When the Kuominjun came, there was no grain left to demand. Frustrated, they burned down our family farm instead. When I protested, they beat me and left me for dead.
See, the thing is, the story that he's talking about, I'm sure it's happening in places all over China. So I would assume this is kind of lead to kind of what I was talking about, of more of a syndicalist, power to the people, socialist revolution.
When the bandits found me, I tried to run away at first. We were loyal subjects, after all. But the bandits treated me better than any government ever had. They told me no pretensions about the politics of Beijing. There is no law in China, they said, but the law of the strong. They were Zhang Zongcheng's men, dogs of the dog meat general. They did as they wanted, when were they pleased, and took what they needed. For that, they said, they were called outlaws. They offered me to join them, to roam free from the dictates of false government. Free.
I mean, at that point, it sounds like a better deal than anything else has got going on, right? His father's dead. Who knows what's happening? Or the rest of his family's farm's been burned down. Year after year, new governments come and just take away all their hard work. Nothing given in return. What else are you going to do, right?
From the shackles of civilized society, I had but one condition. Later that month, we attacked the Guominjun garrison. Once inside, we found their wealth hidden in the basement. Gold, grain, supplies, enough to feed 12 villages. We took it all and gave it back to the farmers. They celebrated us, for bandits have given them the justice that the government in Beijing never would. What was taken from the people, we returned to the people. We were loyal subjects, after all.
With the Northern Geely's defeat in late 1924, hope blossomed that the warlord era might finally be nearing its end. Jiang Zuolin, still lacking political capital and forced to compromise with Feng Yuxiang's Guominjun, convened a national reunification conference in Beijing. Feng was particularly sympathetic to the Kuomintang, and for the first time ever, Sun Yat-sen traveled to Beijing to attend. However, before any agreement could be reached, the venerated revolutionary succumbed to cancer, aged just 58. Sun Yat-sen's untimely death threw a wrench into the ongoing negotiations in Beijing.
I would say so.
And the nationalists began to rapidly descend into a succession crisis. The Kuomintang fractured into 3 major factions, each rallying around a different leader. Wang Jingwei emerged as the head of the leftist camp, advocating for a continued alliance with the French communards, believing their support was essential for the party's success and survival. Opposing him on the right was Hu Hanmin, whose faction, wary of leftist influence, had largely withdrawn from Guangzhou, seeking safer strongholds in Shanghai and Beijing. Between them stood Chiang Kai-shek, leading the military center of the party. A pragmatist, Jiang sought to balance both sides while focusing on a singular goal: the military build-up necessary for a northern expedition. He carefully maneuvered between the factions, consolidating power while avoiding an outright split, at least for the time being. The months following Sun's death were marred by turbulence and bloodshed. Political assassinations and violent clashes plagued the party's ranks, with figures like Liao Zhongkai narrowly escaping attempts on their lives. The growing tensions finally came to a head at the party's 4th assembly, where the fragile unity of the Kuomintang shattered entirely. The confrontation between Wang and Hu proved decisive, driving an irreparable wedge between the left and right, and leaving the party divided. With the KMT unable to achieve even internal unity, national reunification with Beijing was now out of the question. While the Kuomintang fought internally, another distant revolution would soon impact China just as much as its own internal politics. By 1925, wildcat labor strikes and clashes in faraway Britain had escalated into a full-scale syndicalist revolution. Colonial governors, effectively abandoned by the waning British Empire, eyed London with trepidation, and the Royal Navy began a chaotic retreat back to Europe to support the Home Isles. Thousands fled Britain to Canada, and what forces could be withdrawn to assist the evacuation effort were recalled. In the colonies, fears of revolution spread like wildfire. With the British Raj already in disarray, the colonial constabulary's once iconic Sikhs had either been recalled, disbanded, or stood down.
Yeah.
Police forces in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Malaya were left critically undermanned. Matters in China were made all the worse when fears of a possible syndicalist uprising in Australia, inflamed by the still infamous Melbourne riots, triggered the recall of most British forces in China.
I don't think we've gotten into anything going on down in Australia yet that I can remember. I don't remember anything being mentioned much about that yet in previous videos that we've gone into.
Excluding local auxiliaries, remaining British leadership, and personal security, Britain's concessions and territories were left poorly policed and virtually undefended by midsummer 1925. As British authority in China wavered, tensions in Shanghai began to spread out of control. On May 30th, a peaceful demonstration led by students from the left-wing Shanghai University turned violent. Overstretched colonial police, in their attempt to disperse the crowd, panicked and opened fire. killing over 50 people. This Shanghai massacre sent shockwaves across China, igniting an anti-colonial movement named after the event. This so-called May 30th movement spread from city to city at breakneck speed. Strikes and boycotts sprang up around China like wildfire, bringing foreign economic interests to a halt and shaking the foundations of European colonial control. 23 days later, thousands of anti-imperialist protesters attempted to seize a joint British-German concession in Guangzhou, only to be met with bullets. Dozens of civilians died in this Shaqqi massacre, alongside over 150 wounded. Boycotts and strikes rocked the major coastal cities, and the Kuomintang were all too quick to capitalize on the propaganda opportunity. By June, civil war had swept across the British Home Isles, and it was clear Britain's concessions would receive no further assistance from London, Canberra, or Singapore.
Dominoes are falling.
This precarious situation was felt most keenly in Hong Kong, which had been completely destabilized by the rapid succession of crises. Then, in July, Kuomintang leadership declared their intent to retake the Crown Colony. With KMT forces mere miles away in Guangzhou and anarchy looming, acting Governor Claude Severn had to choose: either risk losing Hong Kong or appeal for aid from the nearby German Guangzhouwan garrison. Severn felt he could not go to the United States. They were, after all, further away, and considered dangerously non-committal after their neutrality in the Great War.
I can see that.
His decision, the infamous Severn Note, would rewrite the course of history. Choosing race over national identity, Severn petitioned the German Governor-General of Indochina for help. Effectively, Severn was offering Britain's vast Chinese holdings to the Germans on a silver platter. Berlin complied eagerly.
Of course.
And not long after, 3,000 German troops landed in Hong Kong. While anti-foreign revolts would continue for some time, a KMT invasion was now out of the question. After securing Hong Kong, the government in Berlin saw an opportunity for even further gains and offered protection to all of Britain's Chinese concessions. In response, Japan and the United States, the other remaining powers in East Asia, made the same guarantees. Over the following weeks, all three countries rushed to secure as much British territory as they could hold. A period of intense competition later known as the Shanghai Scramble. This new colonial struggle reignited years of German-Japanese tensions. As Tokyo and Berlin consolidated their new holdings in Asia, their troops faced one another in a series of tense standoffs. While civilian life went on largely as usual, British concessions across China suddenly found themselves divided by walls of sandbags, manned by steely-eyed German, Japanese, and American Marines. This state of affairs would last several years.
Damn. There's just so much turmoil and change happening in China at this time, dude. It's like, I don't understand how a normal average human, just a regular Joe Schmo worker farmer, would be able to like live a normal life. Obviously they did.
Even as the great powers
in the context of this, they are.
Concessions, its fragile governing coalition in Beijing began to collapse. By November 1925, Jiang Zuolin and Feng Yuxiang were at war. Soon, the weaker Feng had been forced to the northwestern periphery, while to the east near Nanjing, Jiang Zhongchang and Sun Chuanfang came to blows over Shanghai. Sun Chuanfang's decisive victory over the dog-meat general gave the Smiling Tiger enough political capital to declare a new League of Five Provinces in Nanjing. Now ruling most of eastern China, including some of China's richest provinces, Sun Chuanfang had effectively supplanted Wu Peifu as de facto head of the Jili clique. While this balance of power would prove temporary, it signaled an end to any pretense of Jili unity. Going forward, there would be two Jili cliques, one led by Wu Peifu and Cao Kun, and another led by Sun, the Smiling Tiger. With the disgraced Wu Peifu largely contained in central China, Jiang Zuolin's Feng Tian clique now exercised total control over the Beijing government. Unfortunately for Jiang, this government was a far cry from the powerful central authority it had been during the time of Yuan Shikai. Continually dissolved, reconvened, bribed, and manipulated, the National Assembly had lost any semblance of legitimacy. All three of the nation's constitutions, from 1912 to 1923, had been trampled on and ignored. Meanwhile, the man at the helm, Jiang Zuolin, never escaped his unfavorable reputation. In the eyes of the intellectual class, Jiang was a bandit who had stolen the Republic, a prize he could never hold on to for long. Matters were no better economically. With 2 major wars in under 2 years, the shock of the British collapse, and ongoing strikes in China's major ports, the outlook was dire. Many schools, shuttered during the war due to the fighting and lack of funds, failed to reopen. All across the north, levees and other infrastructure, now chronically underfunded and maintained only by local patchwork, had begun to collapse. When these failed, the consequences were often disastrous, and unchecked flooding continued to claim hundreds of thousands of lives. Perhaps worst of all were the bandits. While highway robbery had been a problem for centuries, dissatisfied or demilitarized soldiers frequently turned to banditry.
What else is there to do? Again, like the story from the farmer, like, what else is there to do when everything you've worked for is constantly taken from you? Your family's fallen apart, people have died, farms been taken from you, burned down, etc. What else can you do other than turn to a life of banditry to try to survive?
Nature, these small armies would raid and pillage even fortified market towns, leveling everything in their path. When these men were inevitably reabsorbed by one war...
it all kind of goes back to, when you're at that stage, it all goes back to survival of the fittest, and you got to fight to live and eat.
...Lord army or another, their old habits were rarely left far behind. Facing the realities of a divided nation, Jiang Zuolin had few remedies to offer. However, in Guangdong, the Kuomintang presented an ideological alternative. The KMT's 3 principles of nationalism, democracy, and welfare proved tantalizing prospects for millions. To many, the white sun became a rallying symbol for justice, hope, and prosperity. Now the situation seemed perfect for the Kuomintang's latest and long-planned northern expedition. They prepared for a sweeping conquest, dreamt of by the late Sun Yat-sen, ridding China of warlordism and uniting the entirety of the country under a single government. On July the 9th, 1926, General Chiang Kai-shek addressed his 100,000-strong revolutionary vanguard in Guangzhou. Trained by French officers in the ways of Western warfare and armed with modern weapons, the National Revolutionary Army had become a formidable fighting force. Within a week, Chiang's armies overwhelmed Zhili-aligned forces in Henan and reached the provincial capital, Changsha. Their true target, however, was Wuhan. The Tri-City area, including one of China's largest arsenals and the birthplace of the Xinhai Revolution, represented both a strategic and political stepping stone to the Northern Expedition's goals. An overstretched Wu, still fighting Guominjun remains in the north, rushed south, hoping to hold the city against the revolutionaries.
That ain't gonna happen.
Unbeknownst to the Kuomintang, however, a new power was about to enter the war. Some time earlier, League warlords had entered secret negotiations with the German Empire to intervene on their behalf. Tragically, the Kuomintang's northern expedition was now not marching towards victory, but towards an inevitable trap. Berlin had quietly begun pulling the strings, intending to deploy their own vision for the future of China.
Doesn't surprise me.
Wuhan and Jinhua, then, the future of China would be decided. Could the Kuomintang restore the ideals of a Chinese republic? Or would the Kaiserreich, stretching ever further after the collapse of rivaling Britain, finally subject China to a new imperial order? Or perhaps even a restoration of the Qing Emperor?
Okay. Well, there we have it. There we have it. Feels good to get back into some Kaiserreich. It's been a long time. I really enjoy these, you know, alternate history documentaries. As I said, you know, during the earlier parts of the video, I'm not very familiar with Chinese history during this time period at all. So I really am not sure exactly how much of the earlier parts of the video are real history that then turns into the alternate history. That's usually how most of these videos go when it's something I'm not familiar with. Usually the earlier stuff is more involved in real history that then, you know, turns into alternate history, but fascinating. I mean, yeah, I didn't really talk quite as much during this video again because of that. I was really just kind of reacting, you know, solely to what information was thrown at at me. But I mean, it really does seem like China's primed for some kind of, you know, socialist or syndicalist revolution. I mean, the story that the farmer was telling, you know, over and over again, every year a new government, new warlord would come, take their grain, take all their hard work from them, leave them with scraps, and every year just got harder, got worse. His father got sick and eventually died. Eventually they weren't able to work enough to make enough grain. Farm was burned down. He was beaten to almost to death, and the only thing he had left essentially was to turn to banditry, was just to turn to, you know, a life of crime, and it all really turned to survival of the fittest. So I mean, it's just crazy how much, you know, change and turmoil and everything was going on in China at this time. It honestly, like, every few months someone new was coming into power with a new formal government, and then they were getting deposed, or they made some kind of wrong decision, or a foreign government was getting involved, Japan or Germany or Britain or whoever, and rapid change, and it would be hard for anyone to really keep up with. I mean, like, I could only imagine what life as just an average person would have been like during an upheaval like that, you know? Just trying to make ends meet, take care of your family. But yeah, great video. Links, as always, will be down below in the description to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to Kaiser Cat Cinema's channel here, as this was another Kaiserreich documentary, episode 9, alternate history of the Chinese Civil War lore. This was part 1. We will obviously check out part 2 another time. But yeah, like I said, it feels good to get back into the Kaiserreich stuff. You know, in general, I love history, especially, you know, I'm just fascinated with war history and tactics and battles and political intrigue and stuff like that. So seeing, you know, that this mod for a game, I think, actually has sparked such interest that it's turned into a straight up, you know, Discovery Channel style, you know, documentary and lore. It's fascinating. It's interesting, and it's interesting to see and think about how things can change and how different things turn out, you know. But so far, out of every of the factions that we've kind of checked out here, this one seems to have had the most going on right now. So I'm curious to see how it's going to turn out in part 2. You know, is there going to be a revival and unification of the Qing dynasty or empire, or, you know, are foreign countries going to come in and cut it up, you know, for their own personal gain? I guess we'll find out. So yeah, thanks you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video, you know, of mine. If you did, consider leaving a like and a sub. It helps me and the channel grow. There's playlists for other videos, other universes I've done reactions to, Magnus Archives, Warhammer 40k, Fantasy, the SCP Foundation, etc. So if any of that has any interest for you, you can take a look at those. There's also other Kaiserreich videos that I've taken a look at, some from Kaiser Cat Cinema here and from other channels. So yeah, you can check those out if you'd have any interest in that. But yeah, feels good to be back, and I look forward to checking out the next one. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. You know, like I said, if you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and a sub. It helps me and the channel grow. And yeah, we'll see you guys on part 2.